So welcome everyone to our REDS seminar, super subtle way of trying to establish here at Stanford a research agenda that looks at a way of rethinking European development and security. REDS, we're hinting who we think may be a threat to that development and security. Who knows who it is? But this is a joint project between the Europe Center, Anna Gismala-Bouze, who's the director of the Europe Center, the Center on Democracy, Development, and the Rule of Law, and I find myself the director of that right now, the Hoover Institution, and CREASE. And our goal is really, again, to draw more attention to these so-called lands between Russia and the West. And so we've had a number of amazing speakers come through, and you can look at our website and see some of the YouTube videos of that. Before I introduce our amazing speaker today, Jason Wittenberg, I should also mention that next week, same time, same place, we will have his colleague from Berkeley, Steve Fish, come and talk about the rebirth of the high dominance liberal. And if that's not enough to, just that title to get you out here, there's also food, of course. So my job is to introduce Jason and then to turn the microphone over to Jason and then turn it over to Anna, who is professor of political science here, and as I mentioned, the director of the Europe Center and the author of her own fabulous new book, and Sacred Foundations, which is available on Amazon currently. Jason is a professor of political science at Berkeley, where he has been since 2005. He has a PhD in political science from MIT, and I was interested to see a PhD from Berkeley, a BA from Berkeley in physics. Good for you. Interesting, intriguing combo. We need to talk about why you changed. Yeah, majors. Yes, quite a shift. He has had visiting fellowships at EUI in Florence, Fulbright in Hungary at the Central European University. He co-authored with another one of our REDS speakers from this year, Jeffrey Kopstein, from UC Irvine, the book Intimate Violence, Anti-Jewish Pogroms on the Eve of the Holocaust, which was published by Cornell in 2018, that won several awards. And then Jason has also authored his own book, award-winning, I should say, book, Crucibles of Political Loyalty, Church Institutions and Electoral Continuity in Hungary. So he is a well-known, well-respected scholar of Eastern Europe in particular, working on Poland and Hungary. He's written a slew of articles as well on authoritarianism and the legacies of communism, and on information and voting, especially with respect to Hungary and Poland, which so far still vote. Today, he's going to talk about, his talk is entitled, Is Popular Support for Liberal Democratic Decline a Problem of Information? The Case of Hungary. So over to you, Jason, and thank you so much for coming all the way across the bay.
Thank you so much, Catherine, for that nice introduction. It's good to be here. It's been many years since I've been here, and it's nice to see some familiar faces in the room. So Hungary, if you read the newspapers, Hungary's been in the news. It's considered the Prime Minister of Hungary, Viktor Orban's considered a kind of Pied Piper for some new model for, some people consider it authoritarian rule. I'm less sympathetic to call it full-blown authoritarianism. I'll return to that issue sometime during the talk. Orban and his party have won a series of elections despite a bunch of reforms, and there's a little bit of debate about just in terms of this generic model, kind of how the leaders stay in power in this new model of what I prefer to call liberal democratic decline rather than authoritarianism. So that's what I'm going to talk about. Actually, I'm going to end with together with Laura Yockley, whom I'm working on this project with, a former student who's now at Harvard. We are going to field in the future a survey experiment which tries to get at this issue of information. So part of the talk is going to be what's happened in Hungary and why some explanations that are out there don't seem to work. And then had it been a year from now rather than now, I would talk about the results of a survey experiment, which then show the role of information, but we don't have it yet. So I am going to introduce you, however, to the survey. So if you have, particularly if you have input on the survey, now is a great time to do it because we haven't fielded anything yet. Oops, no, Alyssa was very explicit that this thing should never, under any circumstances, be touched. It's human nature to touch it. Yes, she was. She was here. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry. Well, that's positive. Okay, I'm going to talk about the outline of the presentation. So I'm going to, speak in general terms a bit about like the generic problem that we're talking about, as opposed to diving right into Hungary, and then some explanations that people have for why this might be going on. Then we're going to dive into Hungary since 2010, which is when Fidesz came to power and sort of initiated this transformation. We're going to go a bit through evidence for pre-existing explanations, and then finally the proposed survey experiment, which tries to get at one of the explanations, which is maybe the most difficult to find evidence for. So that's the game plan. Are you keeping time, Anna? Who's? Can you warn me at 15 minutes? Okay. Yeah, when I have 15 minutes left. Yeah. So this new model. So the background to this is that for most of the 20th century, we kind of knew what goes on when a democracy gets turned into an authoritarian regime. There's a coup d'etat, elites get arrested, imprisoned, the police go out on the street. Very clear in the 20th century what that model looked like. Now, that's like an old, the old version of authoritarianization. But there's a new model, and it actually, although Hungary is an example of it, it was not the first one. What I consider the first two actually that occurred around the same time was when Erdogan came to power in Turkey in the early 2000s, and Putin came to power in Russia also in 2000s, as like the initial, progenitors of this new model. And the new model, if you look at those countries, and maybe even a few more, like maybe Thailand, possibly Chavez in Venezuela, we can debate that. The new model starts off with a decisive electoral victory under rules that were established by predecessors. So they come to power in a completely kosher fashion in these democratic regimes. That's the first thing. So Putin in 2000, Erdogan in 2002, I believe, and then Orban in 2010. So there's a decisive electoral victory. And then what they do is they try to, the leaders try to cement themselves in power. And they do this in a way that the old authoritarians wouldn't. The old authoritarians would just, cut off parliament. Now what they do is, in a kind of a quasi-democrat, procedurally democratic way, mostly, they weaken democratic checks and balances. So, you can also think Trump, you might think that Trump was an example of this. I can definitely say something about that if people want to talk about that in the Q&A. So you weaken democratic checks and balances. So, and the thing is, depending on the country we're talking about, the details obviously differ. So in Turkey, for example, the check and balances is the military, and secondarily the court. In Putin, maybe it's the oligarchs and then decentralization. In Hungary, as we'll see, it's mainly the constitutional court and then the media. So first the constitutional court and then the media. So they get into power, they do that, And then all of them, in order to kind of increase the probability that they're going to be reelected, try to control the flow of information, and in particular, information that does not, communicate nice things about the incumbent. I mean, it's so Erdogan is the world's biggest, jailer of journalists. Putin has them killed. In Hungary, they just get fired. So in Hungary, not nearly as bad as the other examples. So they do that, and then as a final step, other things are going on too, but as the final kind of generic step, they tweak the electoral system in kind of a globally acceptable ways in order to unlevel the playing field, to make the playing field biased in favor of the incumbent. So this is the model, the generic model. And then, a puzzle here. So one thing about the model is that, I should say, is that elections don't become fully Soviet, fully authoritarian at all. So one of the features of the model is the elections, although not fair in most cases, are generally free. And this was true for the first part of it. So Putin, since 2010 maybe is more authoritarian, but this is the early years of Putin, Erdogan, Orban, they've all submitted themselves to elections that were at least in theory winnable by the opposition. So the puzzle is the parties have remained popular. That's the puzzle. And the puzzle emerges from kind of, it's a puzzle mainly for liberals. Because liberals think, liberals think, part of liberalism is this idea that, people want liberal democracy. Therefore, if the incumbent is getting rid of liberal democracy, which in all three cases was happening, then if given the chance, the voters would throw the incumbents out. Now, Laura and I don't buy into this. So we don't know that much about Russia and Turkey. I doubt it's true in Russia and Turkey. It's probably not true in Hungary. First of all, we don't think that voters have some passionate metaphysical attachment to liberal democracy. Like Erdogan is quoted as saying, democracy is like a train. When it gets you to your destination, you step off. That's a paraphrase of a Erdogan quote. So like if the liberal democratic system isn't working, maybe they want to try something slightly different. And also, in the case of Hungary, there's absolutely no evidence that Hungarians are liberal in the sense that they would oppose illiberal policies the regime is putting into place. So basically, there are three kind of explanations that you can find out there. One is that the opposition is intimidated and fragmented. So, if you have one big party that's contesting votes and you have a bunch of small parties that together might be as big as the big party but are separate from each other, then depending on the electoral system you're using, the big party can engineer things to always come out on top. And this is reflected in what's going on in Hungary, as we'll see in a moment. So there's one big party and a bunch of small parties that can't get their act together. So that's going on. And for reasons I'll get into later, we don't think that actually explains things. The second generic explanation is that the electoral system is rigged in such a way that the opposition actually can't get into power. So we, in the case of Hungary, as we'll see, the rigged electoral system did have consequences for what happened in Hungary after 2010, but we also think, and we'll show the evidence later, that they would have won the elections anyway, just by not as much as they did. And then the final, a final thing, which is actually tough to, this is a tough argument to find, to get real data on. there's this information autocrats. If you read Treisman and Guriev, that incumbents basically prevent information they don't like from people from accessing it or limit it in some way, and therefore people don't really know all the mischief that the incumbent government is getting into. And if they did know the mischief of the incumbent, that people would vote them out. That's the information control hypothesis. We actually don't think that that's correct either for Hungary, which we'll see in a moment. So our argument is that it's phrased in a particularly way that enough Hungarians approve the incumbents, approve Fidesz's changes, that they don't see any reason to vote the party out. Now, if you spend all of your time in Budapest, you might disagree with this. Budapest is if you will, a socialist or a social democratic bastion, but Budapest is only 20% of the country. There's another 80% of the country that actually also votes and has a say. So we don't think that broadly speaking, so we think broadly speaking that the people approve of the incumbents' changes. They know about them and approve of them. And furthermore, that in order to test, to get at this information hypothesis, so there's a problem here is that people choose partisan media. So people select into the media. So the right-wing people read right-wing media, left-wing people read left-wing media. And so the right-wing people reading the right-wing media are never going to know about the incumbents, the right-wing incumbents' malfeasance. So our experiment is to give these people truthful information. I'll get to the experimental design later. Truthful information about incumbent malfeasance, with the idea that at some point the amount of malfeasance might force them to reevaluate their views. And this would be like a direct test of the this idea of the information autocrat. So that's the plan. Okay. So I'm going to hold this. Okay. So why Hungary? Why Hungary? So Fidesz gets its landslide in the 2010 parliamentary elections for reasons that, if you're interested, we can return to later. I don't want to go into it now, but the fact is, under rules created by the prior government, so no Fidesz manipulation in 2010, perfectly reasonable and very much a landslide electoral victory. It initiates the model of a liberal democratic decline, and I'll go into that in a moment, the details in Hungary. Especially, maintaining free but not necessarily fair elections. And then they get decisive electoral victories, 2014, 2018, 22. So every 4 years they have an election. 4 years into Fidesz, 8 years into Fidesz, and 12 years into Fidesz, they get these overwhelming electoral victories. And in the meantime, so this issue of liberal democracy. So the way I look at it is that there is more liberal decline than democratic kind. So we actually have to separate them out. Liberal democracy is not the only kind of democracy. There's I don't like to use Orban's. So Orban calls the system an illiberal democracy. Sometimes he actually is right about things. I mean, it's less democratic than it was before. It's maybe more hybrid. We have to keep in mind that the velocity of downward change is different for liberalism. It's greater for liberalism than democracy. That's the point I want to make here. But both have declined. So let's get to the landslide. So easy. The orange. So this is 2010. This is the parliament after the 2010 national parliamentary elections, and it's very easy, even from the back. All the orange is Fidesz, and then the red is the Socialist Party. And then, is this brown? What color is this one? Green. Okay, I'm colorblind. I apologize. The green is Jobbik. Now, our first maybe hint that Hungarians are maybe not the most liberal people when you consider them as a whole, which is that so Fidesz is a right-wing party, and this dash KDNP is a Christian Democratic Party. So I'm going to call it Fidesz because this is kind of a small appendage that doesn't matter very much. So it's Fidesz. The first and so Jobbik at the time was even more right-wing than Fidesz. Maybe a neo-fascist, at this time, maybe even you could call it a neo-fascist party. So these are the percentages. So Hungary has a mixed system of regional lists plus single-member districts. So we're going to look at the regional list because that's like a better indicator of support. 68% of Hungarians in 2010 voted for right-wing or extreme right-wing parties, leaving 32% for everybody else. So we're going to go through the steps, maybe a little too briefly, with leaving out a lot of details. There's a lot going on in the system, which I can't get into, including economic corruption and so on and so forth. But the model, they follow the model. So first thing in the target is the Constitutional Court, which was a liberal constitutional court from the 1990s when the liberal state was created. So you have a liberal court that's going to bash down the things that Fidesz wants to do. So of course, Fidesz is attacking that liberal court. It approves the new constitution. It turns out there was an institutional flaw in Hungary's post-1989 democracy, which allowed a party that gets 2/3 of the parliamentary seats, a parliamentary supermajority, to basically have absolute power in the sense that it can create a new constitution. It skewed the electoral system and then attempted information control. So we're going to just step through these things. We're going to step through these things. So first thing is the Constitutional Court. So they go at the court and they're advised by. So the thing about the model is, at least in Hungary, is that there are a bunch of lawyers. So they're practicing what someone calls constitutional hardball. Who coined that term? No, it's a good possibility, but I think it was Cass Sunstein actually. Constitutional hardball. So they are going to do everything that they can in order to get what they want. And so they try to fiddle with how judges get nominated. They restrict the jurisdiction of the court. They try to pack the court with their own allies. They lower, for example, they lowered the retirement age in order to get rid of the old liberals that were on the court, and actually had to backtrack because it went to Brussels, and Brussels says you can't do this retroactive. You can't tell a 70-year-old on the court that the retirement age is now 62, and therefore you need to go. That's like a breach of, I don't know what, I'm not a lawyer, but it's a breach of something legal. And Fidesz actually backtracked. So Fidesz says, okay, we're going to do it. But in the end, the end of the story is, in the end, they get their way and they actually pass a new and very illiberal constitution. And of course, there are huge protests, mainly in Budapest, and the sign says the constitution is not a game. Constitution, because they keep revising it. So every time they want to do something and they think there's going to be a problem, they just put it into the new constitution. So that's referencing the game. So they basically neuter the court. And then the electoral districts. So the electoral system. So they heavily gerrymander the system. So there are many things going on here. One is they shrink the size of the parliament from 386 to 199. It isn't clear what the consequences of that is, but that's part of their reforms. Then they don't gerrymander the list district from the regional list, because those are based on the provinces of Hungary. But they do gerrymander the single member district things, and there are actually slightly more single member district seats in the parliament than there are lists. It's like 53 to 47%. And significantly, Hungary had a two-round system before 2010, where in a single member district, if the winner didn't get 50%, it goes to a runoff, like in the French presidential elections. Everybody drops out, but the top two, and then the top two go in the second round. Fidesz gets rid of this, which means Fidesz can now win these single member districts with a plurality of the vote without having to get a majority of the vote. That's actually a very significant change. They give the right to vote to ethnic Hungarians abroad. And in a typical Fidesz way, this gives you an example of how the model works at the micro level, is this change. So you have two kinds of ethnic Hungarians abroad. You have a lot of Hungarians in the Habsburg successor states, Slovakia, Serbia, Croatia, especially Romania. And the way they get to vote is through mail. Then you have another set of Hungarians who are business people and lawyer, people that travel internationally. They're in London, they're in New York, they're in whatever. Well, they're ethnic Hungarians abroad too, so you have to give them the right to vote. Except in their case, they don't get to mail in their ballots. They have to go to, I don't know, the nearest consulate. So the law is intentionally written in this way in order to make it easy for the presumably right-wing Hungarians in the Habsburg successor states to vote, but more difficult for the presumably left-wing, liberal or socialist Hungarians that are bankers and so on and so forth. So the law is actually written in a particular way in order to get a particular outcome. This is a feature of the model. Even greater disproportionality between votes and seats, which was already a disproportional system. So in the system before 2010, the largest party gets a boost. And the reason the largest party got a boost after 1989 is because they were worried about a situation when you had a bunch of small parties and then no one to actually lead the quest to make reforms in order to enter NATO and the European Union. So you boost the largest party so they can lead a coalition that then can do these reforms that were necessary in the 1990s. So Fidesz, makes because Fidesz is the largest party, makes this even more disproportional than before. And then, of course, I mentioned the elimination of the two-round system. So there were significant changes to the electoral system. By the way, none of them individually autocratic. In fact, one of the things that Fidesz loves to point to is that, well, tell me what's authoritarian. The U.S. Has one of the most disproportional systems in the world for some of its elections. So Hungary's not ahead of that. Well, people do this all the time too. Gerrymandering, the U.S. invented gerrymandering, et cetera, et cetera. So you go through the list and you say, well, but the combination of them, Kim Lane-Chappell, actually, who knows the most about this topic of anybody, maybe in the world, she teaches at Princeton, calls Hungary a Frankenstate because it like takes the worst aspects of different electoral systems around the world and combines them into one system. Alas. Okay, so let's do the media parts because this gets to the information. So what do? So they get into power, and one of the first things they do is they create a national media council. Actually, there are councils for a lot of different areas. So there's one for the media, and they stack it with Fidesz appointees who have terms of 9 years. So very long terms. And basically, they require balance. There are fines for objectionable content. actually all sorts of other smaller things that they do, but maybe one of the largest is a fine for objectionable content. And this led to these protests again in Budapest, where they're holding up newspapers and journals, and it's saying censored, and people have tape over their mouth, because who determines content? Who determines objectionable content? Well, it just so happens that the Fidesz appointees on the National Council are the ones that adjudicate among that. So it's clearly kind of an indirect way of enforcing self-censorship. There's actually, in the meantime, the Fidesz, allied news outlets are, putting out things, and they're doing it in a way that you would call kind of smart propaganda. There's this. When we talk about China, we always talk about smart repression and smart this and smart that. There's a kind of smart propaganda. I don't want to go to it now because we may run out of time, but there's a website, Orban.media, which is very nice and kind of illustrates how the government is doing this. So it's you don't know you're reading propaganda, basically. So it's not old style propaganda, imperialists amass forces on the border ready to slaughter your children. It's not that old-fashioned 1950s propaganda. It's regular news stories that just happen to leave out things and include things that create a viewpoint. So interesting website if you have time at some point to do that. And of course, pressure on opposition voices. Needless to say. So they are definitely pressuring the media, and actually this is one of the things that this was the first sign of a decline of democracy as opposed to a decline of liberalism, was the pressure on opposition media. Because one thing about any kind of democracy is if the opposition can't get its message out, it's no longer a truly democratic system. So that is definitely a sign of democratic decline. And I just want to mention one thing. So the media is a variegated landscape. So there's online, there's radio. So what Fidesz does, it obviously takes control of the state media. So all the state media channels are now controlled by Fidesz. But it also uses this objectionable content thing, for example, to force, to deny private media companies like radio frequencies, because this National Media Council also is like the FEC that like allocates radio frequencies. So they're basically using their control of this centralized council to force opposition voices into a straitjacket. And then maybe the most spectacular thing that happened on the media landscape was the disappearance of Népszabadság, which was the main opposition daily and very widely read, because it was like a direct descendant of the old propaganda rag that the Hungarian Socialist Workers' Party used before 1989, and it liberalized itself and became a reputable newspaper. And that got that disappeared. The owners decided it wasn't profitable. The story is the owners decided it wasn't profitable, took it up, but we're pretty sure Fidesz is involved in that. Now people still can get things online, but it's definitely harder to do. And even they're attacking those. So what is the evidence for? So this has been going on. Most of these changes occur in like the first 7 or 8 years of Fidesz. So now we're in year 12, but a lot of this is going on between 2010 and 2018. So evidence. So there's various kinds of evidence we can look at. One is this is Pew, and just look at trends over time. And one interesting thing you will notice that so remember, Fidesz's big thing starts in 2010. So you see it's almost like you know, a discontinuity. There's like a it's not a smooth transition. So fetus comes into power, and then boom, you start. But it starts actually. The graph starts from 1998, and for example, the socialists were in power during all of this period. The socialists were in power. So that's one piece of evidence. Second piece of evidence maybe is this nice graphic, which doesn't actually go to 2022, but basically you see these are the seats Fidesz gets in 2010, 2014, and 2018. So these, and also in 2022, which is not shown here. So they kind of repeat their large victories in 2014, 2018, and 2022. So some people will say, and it's true that we can't trust voting in Hungary after 2010. You know, there's vote, but you know, there's various, you know, Isabella Maris and co-author wrote about vote buying and other micro level forms of that stuff in Hungary and Romania. So there's that. Sometimes people's jobs depend on. So there's various reasons why we can't fully trust the vote, at least you know, at some level. But the thing is, people then jump to say that, well, they're winning because of all this malfeasance. Now, we don't think that that's true. It doesn't actually add up. It doesn't add up mathematically. Let me put it that way. Even if you assume Fidesz is doing all of that, the degree of Fidesz victory in elections suggests that these smaller interventions, while perhaps you know, to their liking, didn't actually influence the final result. So if you, for example, look at a poll of polls, this might be a little light, and the only line you need to really think about is this one, because this one is Fidesz. This is a poll of polls, parliamentary voting between 2014 and 2020, and you can see this is voting intention, not a vote. So no one's going into a voting booth. You're just being asked in a survey. A huge advantage for Fidesz. And here's the 2018 election. And here's the refugee crisis. Sorry, it's a very poor, it's a very poor image. So at the level of voting intentions, and then if you look at Orban popularity over time, which I found online, so the blue is satisfied. You know, are you satisfied or are you dissatisfied? And you can see that you know, there are a couple of things. So after the 2014 election, there's more dissatisfied, and in November 2016, there's slightly more, but basically it's a pro-Orban story. I don't remember. You know, one of these was one of the oligarchs that support Orban, Lajos Simicska, broke with Orban and used his media holdings to advertise a bunch of bad things about Orban, and so maybe that's, you know, we don't really know, but you know, there were events going on that caused these things to move. So let's get to the evidence and then the experiment. So was it an intimidated or fragmented opposition? So the opposition is definitely fragmented. It's not intimidated, but it's fragmented. So it's fragmented, first of all, between an extreme, in the early years, between an extreme right and then a liberal left. And then within the liberal left, there was huge fragmentation. So you didn't have one party representing the liberal left. You had 8 parties representing the liberal left, and there were egos involved, all sorts of things. So totally fragmented. Fidesz is the biggest party. So you know, it's consistent with the results, the voting results. But yet the polling, as we saw, shows that Fidesz is the most popular party by a significant margin. Forget about the vote. Furthermore, In 2022, just last year, finally, the opposition read the signals that says if we don't unite, we're going to lose again. After big losses in 2014, 2018, they united, including the far right, actually including one of the far right parties, unites with the left liberals. This is how bad things are now, the strange bedfellows phenomenon, and they still lost by a comfortable margin. Even the united opposition to Orban still lost. It's not about fragmented opposition as such. We can say that their parliamentary supermajority in 2014, 2018, 2022 is a result of their own electoral manipulation. No manipulation, no parliamentary supermajority. However, Fidesz would probably, we don't really know the answer to this for sure, almost certainly Fidesz would have won these elections if held under the 2010 rules, given their popularity overall. We don't really know the answer to that, but probably that's true. Information control. There's no evidence in favor of this, in favor of the information control argument. There's some evidence against it. The opposition media, as of 2014, as of the first election under Fidesz control, is still active, and still, Fidesz wins by a large margin. Now, it may be the case again that the Fidesz supporters, the incumbent supporters, are selecting themselves into media that don't advertise Fidesz's things. So, as a caveat to that, and so the justification for our survey experimental intervention is to force the exposure to Fidesz supporters of this bad news about Fidesz. So the proposed survey design, nationally representative sample, embedded experiment is facts about Hungary that are unlikely, kind of mostly negative things that are unlikely to be found in government media on a range of topics: corruption, Hungary's democracy ranking, et cetera, et cetera. So just briefly, you get a set of demographic information about the survey respondents, and then you randomly administer these information treatments, as we say, and the way we do it is they're in increasingly powerful dosages. So I'll get to that in a moment. And then the treatments, again, vary on a range of topics. And then finally, at the end of it, say, how much is your confidence in the Hungarian government, your confidence in Fidesz change? And so the idea would be that maybe some of the bad news would force some of the people to reevaluate their confidence. So the increasing doses. So the way we're going to do the experiment is you ask the people what's important to them from a list of things, like say corruption. Many people are interested in that, and then you give those people corruption treatments. And so this is the least. I won't read it, but first we describe the company. It turns out that the source of the information is important in terms of how much people will believe the information. So corruption perceptions, and then we say, well, Hungary fell in its rankings of corruption. So that's one dosage. And then a different set of people get this. So some people just get, some people just get this. Other people's get this common thing plus this extra bit of information, where we throw in information that Hungary is now tied with Kuwait, and perhaps more poignantly for Hungarians, lower than Romania in ranking. So this is this is designed to it's like, oh, are we really, are we really, are we really that bad, etc. So that's dosage 2. And then some people get the initial one, the second one, and the third one, which is explicitly ties it into corruption by saying that Fidesz misused EU coronavirus funds, which I'm sure is true, that were directed towards Fidesz supporters rather than toward the common, rather than to everybody. So that's an example of the corruption treatment. Our expectations for the results are null effects at low dosages. So no change in confidence, because we think that certainly at the low dosages, people just don't care. It's like, oh yeah, Fidesz is corrupt. We don't, either we already knew it, or now that we know it and we still don't care. Perhaps at the highest dosage, when we register this, we're going to have to decide, how we really feel about this. Maybe we get an effect at the highest dosage. Now, there are some complications with this strategy. So the treatments may be insufficiently intense to provoke an effect. So it's unethical to administer false information. So if we could administer false information, you could say, Fidesz is coming for your firstborn child. So watch out. And of course you would get but you can't do that. So you have to kind of troll around and find out the most significant but truthful thing that you can put in. So this is a problem because you may get null results because the treatment isn't strong enough. And this is a very common problem in these sort of information experiments, I will say. And the second issue, we have great reason to believe. I mentioned source credibility earlier. So if people think the source is source of the information is left wing, they're just going to say that's just it's like telling MSNBC viewer, well, Fox News says this, well, or the reverse. It's like, okay, I'm not going to believe it. And of course, partisan bias. So there's a lot of partisan, thinking going on, and so this might also, complicate any result. So 2 more slides. The prognosis is no return to a liberal state in the near and probably the medium term. And a couple of reasons to do this. First of all, Fidesz implemented a lot of the key changes using so-called cardinal laws. So there are regular laws and cardinal laws. And for cardinal laws, you need 2/3 of the parliament in order to approve it, and consequently 2/3 of the parliament in order to not approve it, to get rid of the law. So any future government that wants to pull out this these illiberal roots in the future has got to have a stable 2/3 majority in the parliament in order to do so. So that's number one. 2, the formation of a truly united opposition is in the near term unlikely. There are kind of socialist leftovers in the current opposition. Ferenc Gyurcsány, who was involved in the pre-1989 system and then led the socialists, all kinds of personalities. So the left liberals have a long way to go to unify themselves. And then, of course, you have to bring the right wing along as well. And so this is just going to be a big hill to climb for the opposition, at least in the near term. And even if I'm not going to end on a sad note, I have one more slide. Even if the opposition does unite, again, we're not sure, but the people approve of a lot of these changes, which include, I didn't mention this, but like restrictions on pornography. So among the content of Fidesz's policy, it's like restrictions on pornography, law and order, etc., which plays very well with people. So one of the disadvantages of the hyper-liberal state of the 1990s was that it was an anything goes situation, and Hungary is a kind of a traditional country, and it didn't really appeal to that many people. So my slight bit of good news is from Pew Research from last year, which is that there's a generational divide. It's the old people. Old people think actually Fidesz made it more democratic. And let me just, you might think this is strange, but it's actually not strange, because there's a way in which the people, absent the liberal state, which was basically bashing everything away, the people actually do have more of a say in like how the country is governed now than they did under the reign of the liberal state. So that's the view of the 50 pluses. And then, of course, the young people, see it in a different way. And so, maybe that bodes well for the future. Thank you. Yes.
So here's a few minutes for questions. So I will take some questions.
Okay.
Before.
We end at 1?
We end at 1 for the Zoom and 1:15 for the.
Okay.
So okay, Sherry, and then yep. Sherry. Oh, sorry. Hi, thank you. Oh, I guess okay. So I'll ask 2 quick questions. One is for the last slide. I mean, why not just say then that the main problem is that most Hungarians actually, as you've said throughout, and as your last slide also kind of indicates in a different way, are just fine with what's going on. I mean, why do we need a more complicated explanation other than that they sort of think the country is more or less democratic and they don't care that much about the illiberal things that he has done. I mean, the other explanation that you don't deal with, which comes from, I guess, the same literature as the sort of more bottom-up kind of explanation, right? Which is that in polarized societies, like you mentioned, there's a big distinction between Budapest and the more rural areas. People are just fine. They're like, yeah, we understand he's doing some non-kosher things, but that's okay because we hate what the other side would have done so much that it's fine for us. So I guess the question is, if there is these kinds of views in Hungarian society that either condone or don't care about what Orban has done, what is the puzzle?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, so that's a good question. So there. Okay. Yeah, that's a good point. So as I said, it's a liberal puzzle. If you read in the popular press, there's a lot of stuff going on about, well, this thing, this thing can't last, and people are getting tired of it. So it is a little bit more of a puzzle, like in the broader world, than it may be in academia. And secondly, what we don't know is the effect of Orban, the effect of information since 2010 on people's views of things. So this could be this could actually be an effect. In theory, we could get this info. This could be an effect of Orban being in power and controlling and putting out these messages in the media, which is actually changing people's minds. In which case, that would be a different argument. It's very hard to get leverage on. But that's the information. That's the information argument, that they're actually changing people's minds because it's smart propaganda. It's not crazy these people all underwent propaganda for decades under the socialist system, but you could, it was more obvious and you could dismiss it. Whereas this time you're reading a newspaper and it seems perfectly normal to you. And so you might, so that's why it's tough.
There is one thing that, in my mind, adds even more to the puzzlement that you describe is when you consider the history of Hungary in the second part of the 20th century compared to other countries. It's a country that was essentially under communist dictatorship. It's a country where in 1956, you had Russian tanks. You'd think that Hungarians would be much more attached to democracy when considering the past history, and apparently it's not the case. And I was wondering if you have any explanation for that.
I can tell you the way that I won't speak for my co-author now. The way I've been thinking about this is, after 1989, there was a great enthusiasm for democracy, but it was a democracy that doesn't exist. They were pining for something which can't exist in the which brings they want to be Sweden. So democracy doesn't just mean we go to the polls every 4 years. democracy means 6 weeks of vacation and a 35-hour work week, and Sweden or Germany, choose your Northern European country that you want to use it. And these were, needless to say, brutally and cruelly wiped from their, not just the financial crisis, but other kinds of crime and so on and so forth in the 1990s. And so into the 2000s. And then the financial crisis, of course, dealt a death blow to this ideal that liberal democracy, that you should resolve everything under the ambit of liberal democracy, as opposed to maybe trying something else out. But in the beginning, they actually were. But in part, Western, I blame us, Western elites were not very smart about managing expectations. Let me put it that way. Early on, about what democracy could actually achieve, and maybe some of the problems that go along with it.
Of course, that was true in all the countries of the region.
Yes, it was.
I mean, it's not just Hungary.
No.
So Hungary is somehow an exception. But so I was in Hungary for a couple of weeks in November, and almost everything you said sort of conformed to my impressions and people I talked to. But this is a question that comes from sort of anecdotal evidence and has to do with these questionnaires you're going to do. Hungarians, it's hard to, we shouldn't generalize, right? But they're very nationalist in general. I mean, they have a certain view of their own nation, placed against the history of the 20th century and 21st century that's quite powerful.
Okay, we'll accept that.
I think that you would agree.
We don't need to.
You would agree with that. So when you ask people questions, I found myself when I was talking to people, I did better not asking them directly, critical things about Fidesz, but letting them say things themselves. In other words, when you ask people questions like, I'm just curious about the design of your experiment, as it were, how do you avoid the fact that they're going to react being asked by an external, set of surveyors? How do you avoid a kind of nationalist response, which will give a more positive view then of Fidesz than would otherwise be there? That's what I found a lot, that the more that I pushed people, except for the people then on the left, who were then happy and were, then raged about the Orban government. But the people who were sort of, conservative and on the right, and I think you properly indicate, it's generally widespread popularity of Fidesz. How do you avoid that kind of reaction? You see what I mean?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So there is a way, we're trying to design the experiment, the survey in a way which doesn't quite get at your question, but it partially does, which is that we're also including information on socialist corruption. If the respondents think that this survey is only about Fidesz, you're absolutely not going to get the results that, there may be huge attrition. It's unclear what would happen. And so the idea is, because the socialists, everybody's guilty. The socialists were also incredibly corrupt. In fact, that's one of the reasons that Fidesz was able to gain as much votes, because they were unbelievably corrupt, like in the 2000s, between 2000 and 2010. And so you ask a mix of both, so that the Fidesz partisans don't think that you're picking on, that you're singling out Fidesz, when the socialists also did all of this stuff. That doesn't quite get at your question, but it's a way of ameliorating this. And this is kind of well known in survey design, that you've got to balance things. And another thing we're going to do is we're going to have I think part of it's going to be face-to-face. It's not an anonymous, it's not going to be an anonymous survey where you just can leave your computer. Yeah.
Couple of comments, couple of quick questions.
Yeah.
Are you a descendant of the proprietors of the Wittenberg Castle?
I hope so. I just don't think, there are two kinds of Wittenbergs.
Well, I'm talking about the one where Luther posted as 95.
There are two, let me tell you, Alvin, there are two kinds of Wittenbergs. One of them where it was theoretically possible to have castles, and another where it was both theoretically and practically unthinkable to have castles, and we belong to the second group.
Okay, I just curious. Couple of comments.
I don't like to say it so bluntly, but
Yeah, just a personal. Well, let me ask you the other question very quickly. When you go into countries
yeah.
and do research, and you're not going to hide from anybody, and somebody's going to figure out, I want to do research that sees whether or not people really like this government. Are you going to have any problems getting approval to do this, or will they stop you when they find out what you're trying to do? Is there any risk at all to going forward and having your research compromised because they're not going to let you do it?
No, not
Okay,
yet.
that's okay.
Not yet. Let me
Not
put it
yet,
that
okay,
way. You know,
all right.
we're at this point on the timeline, and that's at this point on the timeline
okay.
of a kind of, if you think of these regimes as having a natural evolution, we're not at that point yet.
Okay, 'cause
They
you
won't
wouldn't
even.
go
They
into
won't
China
even.
and ask what
They
do you
won't
think of
even
the-
know about it. It's a private. It's a private
okay.
survey firm. They do their thing. As far as I know, there's not going to be any issue.
Yeah, if you ask how
Yeah.
people like Putin, you'll end up in jail. Now, another interesting, two other small comments here. They're very short. Get my comment roll back up here again. These things go off too fast. Oh, there we are. Okay. I've only been to Budapest once, and it was 1996, so we're talking a long time ago, but not too far after the change in the Soviet system. I'd been doing research on privatization in the Czech Republic, so I took a weekend to go over to Budapest. I stayed on a lovely hotel on the end of Margaret Island. So beautiful place. And so I spent one day in Buda and one day in Pest. And so I'm walking along the waterfront and I hear this music going on in front of sort of the opera. And as I get closer, it's two guys playing guitars singing Me and Bobby McGee. And I thought, God, they've really caught on very quickly to modernization. So anyway, just a kind of a personal reaction. And then another thing, and I don't know if this is Fidesz or not, because I don't remember the exact time, but I think it may have been their first election after they won in 2012. And maybe you'll remember which party, but the head of the party said, we lied morning, noon, and night.
That wasn't
We
Fidesz.
we lied.
That was the socialists.
Oh, we lied breakfast, lunch, in the afternoon. We lied our rear ends off.
Yeah.
Okay. Did they win that one when they lied?
No.
Oh, okay.
That was before the Fidesz landslide. It
fine.
contributed to the Fidesz landslide.
Okay. And then there's, I'll get us back. And then there's one last thing. You know, if you have 4 children, no more income tax. Isn't that popular with mothers?
Fathers maybe, but not mothers.
You know, there's all these little things popping up that are kind of.
Yeah. So people can't afford to have 4 children in general, and the mothers would definitely not be happy about this. It's a very that's still women's work, but largely in Hungary. So child rearing. There's questions in the back.
Yeah, absolutely. So Hannah and then Abu. Hannah, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. This was really interesting. I'm Hungarian, so I love to see work in Hungary.
One of the good ones.
Thank you. Not according to the government, but you know. But yeah, I think so. I think the like information, like kind of interrogating the information story or explanation is really interesting. And I have like, I guess 2 comments on it. The first one is that I think to me as like a Hungarian who's interested in politics there, I would like my prayer would be that information control is an important explanation. But in that like existing in an information environment for 12 years that is heavily controlled by the government, people like process and perceive critical information differently. But I think so I don't really know kind of what to do with it here, but I think like it is interesting how people update if people update if they receive like regime critical information. So I think that's like really interesting to interrogate, and I wonder if you could like kind of get into the mechanism a little bit more of what people do when they receive that information, because I guess like to me the first stage is maybe people like see the information, but they think the source is not credible. And I think in Hungary, that's very kind of important to consider in any like international comparison of Hungary to other countries as well, or any information that comes from an international source, because the government has been like telling people through like its propaganda for like 12 years that any regime critical information from the outside is biased and we're being attacked unfairly. And then like the other option, especially with like corrupt, there are options that people might already know, of course, or like maybe even if they don't consider important, or they consider important, but they think the opposition is like equally corrupt, would be equally corrupt. And that's kind of the MSP. I kind of see like 4 different reasons why this might not shift preference, then I wonder if we could kind of get into it.
Yes, so my short answer is yes, we need to get into it. It's like how you couch the information, for example, matters. We're very worried, so if we get null, so the truth is, I mean, you've hit the biggest weakness is if we get null results, it might be for 5 different reasons, and not the reason that we're, putting forward as the reason. So it might be that, for example, who was the guy that was born in Hungary that fell in love with communism and then fell out of love with communism and always gets assigned? Can you think of his name? No. There was Arthur Koestler. Arthur Koestler, writes about, so there comes a point in which you believe in something and then you basically swat away anything because it interrupts your like Zen feeling that everything is okay. And then he talks about how these information kept coming in and coming in and coming in, and eventually he actually did break. But it took a long, he had to absorb a lot of things that were like counter to what he thought before he finally broke. And so again, this is why we're worried that the intensity is just not going to be strong enough to. So we take your criticism. We're trying to design things in a way that overcome those to the best of our ability, but it's not clear how much we can do. But they're absolutely correct observations.
Yeah, but I think the
Yeah.
mechanism is really interesting. Like what share of people don't update because they don't want to because like they have a reaction to this.
We're hoping people update, but they very well might not, for the reasons that you point out. Yeah.
I just had a quick question.
Yes.
You didn't really talk about economics, and from what I understand, Hungary can do more that well, worse than some of the surrounding countries with Hungarians. So I'm sure likely with Ghana. So how long will it be that Orban gets away with that?
That's a very good question. So, it depends on how bad, so it's poor, but not, it's doing more poorly, but not badly in some objective. They're not in recession, for example. They do have problems. I mean, Orban, has ridden, just like Putin actually, has ridden a lot of economic, ups and downs, whereas not in terms of Putin's election, but Putin's popularity. So there's something to be said for the case that some of these leaders are kind of immune to the ups and downs of economic, economic ups and downs. And just on the economic side, it was already mentioned about the pro-natalist policy. I mean, they're trying to actually follow the Polish example and really kind of subsidize to the best that they can their core supporters to cushion them from economic shocks. And I think they've learned this actually from Warsaw. This wouldn't have been in their tool. This was PiS's tool with its attempts to do the same thing.
Sorry, I was actually wondering if it's possible to manipulate the source of information in your experiment. So, for example, it's likely that Fidesz supporters will be more willing to believe a source of information from inside the country compared to an outside, especially a Western institution. So, something about like say the same corruption information provided by, say, an institute within the country, and like just make that a separate treatment, compare, and see how that works.
Yeah, that's a very good point. We've discussed this. For example, there are internal Hungarian polling firms that might have things. The thing is, you can't really, sometimes you can get permission to mislead, actually, when the results are important enough and the misleading is not likely to lead to various forms of harm to, actually have actual misleading statements in there, but it's hard to do. It's unethical just to attribute a fact from one source to a different source, like it doesn't get through IRB. So the easy way to do that would be, of course, you have a fact and just vary the source that it comes from, and then boom. And I don't think that would be very kosher.
And on that cautionary note, page Jeremy, and thank you, Jason. Thank you.
Thanks for your questions.